Hi, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 4 of My Words, Our Journey. I'm Monty, and today we'll begin with Chapter 15. The darkness of the room made it difficult. Leonard was not sure what the man in the room was trying to accomplish. The glimmer of light coming from the partially opened closet door at the far end of the room was casting shadows, large and small. They were this way and that, making the room appear to be alive, when in fact there was only one person, surrounded by two large piles of clothing, scampering around like he had just lost his wallet on payday. Moving in closer did not help Leonard identify the man. The dark figure had made his way back to the closet and was returning with another armful loaded with what appeared to be pants and shirts, jackets and ties. There was something wrong. The clothing, all the clothing, was covered in what he could only guess was blood. Lots and lots of blood. When the cargo was deposited between the two piles already there, Leonard figured there was more blood than would have come from slaughtering half a dozen cattle. The figure turned and faced where Leonard stood. In that moment, Leonard felt his entire body change. The figure staring back at him was Miles Humphrey on the left-hand side, and Leonard on the right. Almost, but oddly not quite centered and straight. It was as if the two sides had been put together by a second-grade art class with only moments to go before they were heading outside for recess. Looking through and past Leonard, it was as if he wasn't even there. The expression on the face of the figure would stay with Leonard forever. Torment, shame, regret, hopelessness. It was all there. When the figure reached for him, Leonard was not too startled to move out of the way. The cold from the outstretched right hand and the intense warmth from the left was surprising. At the moment the two hands reached for him, Leonard began to feel the emotions of the figure, all streaming through his body, straight through to his core. It was worry and dread about meeting someone, not feeling ready or prepared, not sure the right decisions were being made, anxious but also serene at the same time, wanting to rush, needing to stop, rethink its plan. No time, no time. All rests on his choices now, to the end. When Leonard awoke, he fought to remember the dream. Experience had told him he would lose it all within seconds if he did not struggle and fight to remember. The last image he could pull out, the one most powerful, was the strange figure kneeling down as if to pray, motioning for Leonard to join him on the ground, as if they were to pray together. There was something that happened after, he was sure. Nothing he tried could make him remember, however, nothing. He knew, in his gut, no matter how hard he tried, he would never be able to erase the face of the strange figure. To his recollection, he had never seen anything so lifelike or horrifying. Even after being awake for over an hour, he would still shudder when thinking about what he could only describe was a nightmare. While Leonard tried, with little success, to regain his composure, he really needed a decent night's sleep, he thought. The ladies were just saying their guarded and distant goodbyes. It was awkward to the 10th degree. As the ladies started to work their way to their own cars, Tammy stopped them and delivered a brief request. I would like for Arnie to be next. She waited for no response or reply, simply opened the door to her minivan and sped away, leaving Madison, for one, wondering how Tammy expected them to pull that off when they were far from being in the clear when it came to the whole Ryan thing. This could be getting out of hand, she thought. Chapter 16. Since the barn incident, as Sharon so cleverly named it, the women had had very little communication. No one wanted to be the reason they fell under suspicion. It was not until 2 weeks later that the group, through Megan, was pulled together for a late breakfast at a busy truck stop just off the even busier interstate. The place was non-stop buffet lines all day long. Their table was the farthest from the hungry line dwellers and surrounded only by noisy arcade games and the secondhand smoke that hovered overhead. Still, no one spoke with any volume. Not one of them was comfortable with being together as a group. As soon as the drinks were served, salad plates filled, and coast clear, Tammy started the conversation. She re-emphasized her desire to see her husband find the same fate as Ryan, following that up with several suggestions on how that could be accomplished. As far as the group was concerned, none were plausible. Setting fires, drug overdoses, and poisonings, each would point back to Tammy if she wasn't careful, and even if she was. And as a group, they all agreed they had no experience or expertise in the area of murder. Ryan, if they ended up getting away with it, was a fluke and could not be duplicated. "Why don't we hire someone to do it for us?" Sharon asked when there was a break in the discussion. With thought, each woman looked around at the others. Why not? They each seemed to be asking themselves. Because you hear about men and women getting caught all the time for doing exactly that, either through sting operations or being turned in by the criminals that they hired. Besides, as I look around this table, other than Megan, I don't see the kind of cash it would take to pay a murderer to take care of each of our husbands. Nodding in agreement, they continued with their lunches, no one giving up on the idea, only bouncing thoughts around in their heads. Sandy was the one, struggling to speak out, not wanting to sound stupid, but liking her idea more and more with each bite of her chicken parm. "Why don't we create our own serial killer who preys on men out on the town with their loving wives?" Madison stopped eating and lit a cigarette, initially liking the sound of that. Even if she wasn't interested in being part of this, she did like the idea. It was original. The others must have too, because there was one question after another that went on for an hour. Obstacles, solutions, objections, agreements, more obstacles, and finally a plan the table as a whole could live with. Each was asked by Megan to go home and think about it for a week, and then they were to meet in the parking lot of the same truck stop where they would discuss the plan again and either reject or start planning and moving forward. The plan, in its simplicity, went something like this. Madison, who everyone assumed was going to go along with this, was to be the shooter, because she had mistakenly mentioned how her grandfather had taught her how to shoot beer bottles from long distances when she was a teenager, and of course the group had already taken care of her problem. She would wait while each of the different occasions the wife would lead her victim through whatever date she had planned. Then at the designated time and place, Madison would appear, shooting and killing the target and making a clean getaway. The wife would then call 911 and give a pre-discussed description of the killer and his getaway car, leading the police on a wild chase for a make-believe murderer. The events would be different enough not to draw suspicion, but similar enough so the media would start reporting a serial killer was amongst them. They would spread the murders out over several weeks, cutting all communication once the plan were set to avoid any chance of being caught. And then when the events were complete, they would be free to start a support group where they would bond as widows brought together by a tragedy in a small town. What could be more perfect? Megan had asked, after offering one of her husband's many unregistered handguns as the weapon. Madison did not have a response. Perfect was not a word that came to mind. Chapter 17. March for Kenny was beginning the same way February had ended, still in court, watching the prosecution struggle to keep a case he was quoted as saying was a can't-lose case only a few weeks before the trial began. Now Kenny caught himself rooting for the other team at times, and would have to remind himself of the work he and his team had put in on this case, and how truly evil the 8 gang members were, and last but not least, the victims. For them, he would pray for justice to prevail, but realistically, he knew, if he was on the jury, he would not like any of the members of the prosecution team, and conversely, he would find the defense more competent and likable. He kept measuring the jury, when not concentrating on Rachel, and when the members of the DA's office spoke, many seemed despondent, but when Rachel spoke, the men and women paid close attention. Not good for his team. She had done an excellent job of bringing out the defendant's limited good qualities through church members, family, and in one case, even a Salvation Army executive that testified to the character of one of the men. Apparently, this individual had raised money through car washes and other local fundraisers in the community, money used to help feed the hungry. Rachel also addressed her clients properly. No flash, no shine, just clean, pressed, neutral-colored slacks, jackets, and starched white dress shirts. And she always had them sitting like choir boys on the front row on Sunday morning mass. Their pseudo-lunch had turned into dinner, Dutch, one evening after a long day, and Kenny was just tired of leaving each day, regretting not making some sort of effort. He would not say they were dating, but she was aware of him in court. He could tell. And they had discussed maybe seeing a movie this weekend. It was a pace he had to adjust himself to. He was finding it, in a weird way, entertaining. So as long as it had a happy ending, he often thought, it would be worth it. He had spoken with Leonard since their dinner with him and Sean, and had decided halfway through the conversation to tell him his news. Leonard had tried to sound happy and enthusiastic for Kenny, but he could tell his friend was more interested in how much Kenny was willing to pay for those 2 used weed whackers he was still trying to unload. It was okay, though. Kenny had the impression Leonard had been less than lucky in love, and he knew Sean would at least make an effort to sound excited for him, if nothing else. Sean was excited. Not about anything involving Kenny or Leonard, however. He was reading a letter from the director. Sean was now copied on certain material that came straight from the top. He had made it, if not completely up the ladder, at least past the first few rungs. Leonard, on the other hand, was ready to jump off the ladder. He was anxious and ready. With less than a month to go, he was not hiding his loss of interest. He had decided it was time to let the young men handle the load now. His time had passed. He was fine with the idea of going out, with the last case being the defender of children. Most important case of his career, he thought. In the past few weeks, the most he had done was pass some papers from one side of his desk to the other, attend a retirement party luncheon for one of his fellow co-workers that started after him, and daydream about his new life. 3 lives, all heading in different directions. One down the path of love, one heading down the path of success, and the last heading down the path of retreat. Chapter 18. 3 weeks after the plan had first been discussed, and 2 weeks after it had been agreed upon, Madison was waking up knowing she was meant to kill someone today. Maybe that was the reason she had not been in a hurry to get out of her warm and cozy bed. In her mind, she had not killed Ryan. He had chosen a path that led to his death, and she had not chosen it for him. True or not, Madison felt she had given Ryan every opportunity to correct his ways, see his chance to make things better, and still be alive. True or not, in her mind, tonight would be the first time she would take the life of another human being, a fact she did not take lightly, nor relish. Listening to the family downstairs, laughing and doing what families do in the morning, Madison felt a tinge travel down her spine. Was it jealousy? There were times over the years, maybe, but this particular morning, it was probably more of a resentful sting. What had she done so right and Madison so wrong for their lives to be in such different places? Her empty home and all its memories had proven to be more than she could handle, which is why she was lying in the bed, looking at the way her sister Lynn had decorated the spare room. She pondered where they differed in their paths. They had never been close, but since Ryan had put her in the hospital, and since the police still had no leads on his whereabouts, her older sister had practically insisted she move in, at least until they could sell the house, and they could be sure Ryan was not going to return and harm her. If Lynn only knew she had invited a murderer into her home and around her children. How Madison did not want to disappoint, not her sister and not her girlfriends. But there was no way out, no way to let the women who were counting on her down. She could not remember the last time someone had actually counted on her. Madison Carver, beaten down housewife and woman who had long since lost any idea of who she was or what she could be. Now she would have to find out. Reaching over and opening the dresser drawer, she felt a revolver that lay underneath the Bible. The Bible had been placed on the edge of the dresser for Madison to find when she initially entered the room her first night. The revolver Megan had taken from her husband's extensive collection. She felt confident he would not miss one. She wasn't even sure that he knew how many were in the attic to begin with. It had not been long for her to place both items in the dresser drawer. The Bible, if she opened it, would tell her, "Thou shalt not kill." And the revolver, well, the revolver was a deadly weapon she had brought into her sister's home, and it reminded her of the deeds she would attempt to commit. Why had she not asked her friend why her husband owned unregistered firearms with the serial numbers scratched off, she thought. Madison did not dwell on this question. Why should she? If things went to plan, Megan's worst half would not be around much longer. At 6 o'clock, after a day of walking around the house trying to stay busy, but failing miserably, she walked outside and waved goodbye to the minivan Lynn backed out of the driveway. She would not need to leave for another 2 hours. After flipping through 300 plus channels and finding nothing to keep her interest, making a salad she could not eat, and skipping a newspaper she could not tell you anything about, Madison dressed, forced back some tears as she looked at herself in the mirror, and headed out to her date with fate. Madison was a strong believer in fate, and she felt all that had happened to her was meant to lead her to this place and purpose in time. It was what would get her through the challenging times. The car, a 4-year-old Dodge, Matt, Lynn's first love and husband of 11 years, had found her through one of his coworkers, carried Madison towards Higgins' restaurant. It was not something Ryan would have allowed her to own, too powerful, too flashy, and just what she liked. Maybe that was why she felt so good when she got behind the wheel. Without knowing it, Matt had presented her with a symbol of her new life. Pulling in, she purposely looked for a spot away from the restaurant and near the alleyway that ran east and west behind the seafood house. It was where Tammy knew she would be able to lure her husband without question, and where she also knew Arnie would park and exit the restaurant when it was time to leave. It was his favorite place, and he was a creature of habit. Madison would have to wait. The plan was for Tammy to keep him drinking until right before closing, and then help him out of the back door and towards their car. She didn't think the time she had spent at the house could have been any worse. She had been wrong. The alley was dark, damp, and smelly. She kept wondering what the other ladies were up to, probably settling in for the night, warm and cozy. But then she realized they too would be worried. How tonight went would determine their futures as well. Too many people were depending on her all of a sudden. 20 minutes before closing, Madison locked her car door and began walking near the curb and into the shadows towards the spot she would wait for her prey. She was nervous walking out in public with a loaded weapon with no serial numbers, even with no one around, but not as bad as she would have figured. At 10:55, she started to prepare, imagining what was about to happen in her head, making sure the revolver was ready in her not-so-steady hand. The back door had opened twice already, once for the kitchen help to drag out trash, and the next time for a waitress who appeared to be leaving food for a dog or cat she must have befriended. Both times her heart leaped in the back of her throat. Now when the door opened, Madison could make out the silhouette of her friend with the help of the dim light just above the door. It was the only light in the alley, allowing her to be in the darkness, but still only a few feet away. Tammy did not appear to be looking around or waiting for anything. She helped her obviously intoxicated spouse down the 2 steps into the alley and towards the light of the parking lot to the west. Building her confidence, and more importantly, just wanting to get this over with, she stepped out, blocking the couple's path. Arnie did exactly what she expected. Even the drunkest drunk will react when they fear they are being threatened, and she had anticipated a dark figure in a dim-lit alley may cause such a response. He lunged at her without quickness or balance, causing her to have to shoot down at him as he fell. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see Tammy taking a step back towards the door. No eye contact, no acknowledgement. After putting 2 more bullets into the mass that lay before her, she turned without a word and sprinted towards the alley. She knew there were only 2 patrol cars in town. Only one would be on duty at this hour, and it was also common knowledge it would be parked out on Route 12, where Ellison would be taking his nap. Sometimes living in a small town could be to an advantage, she thought. Tammy would not be able to stall or wait before calling for help. She did not want to take a chance of looking suspicious, and so Madison would only have a few minutes before the sirens would be heard. Confident the 3 shots had hit their mark and done their job, she now only needed to focus on getting away. As she reached the end of the alley, she paused and listened for any type of commotion. There was only silence. If she was to encounter anyone, the plan was for her to start screaming that someone had been shot in the alley and that she was looking for help, describing a man that the group had already agreed upon. Herself and Tammy would be on the same page if need be. Fortunately, the area was clear and the exit was without incident. She was pulling out of the parking lot with the window cracked as she heard Ellison making his way to the scene. It would be up to Tammy now. She would remember the car ride back to her sister's that night for the rest of her life. The silence, the darkness. She was in the car, secluded with a murderer, a woman she did not know looking back at her with questioning eyes. After committing murder, now sitting alone in the darkness, how was she to feel? Madison wanted to cry, couldn't. Wanted to vomit, couldn't. And she wanted to end the deadly game she had reluctantly agreed to, couldn't. How was her life any better? She found herself wondering. Well, she wouldn't get beaten tonight. That was for starters. Chapter 19. Jill had made breakfast. Sean was just stepping out of the shower when he caught the first whiff of what he hoped was her famous pancakes, with a nice side of sausage or bacon. He needed a pick-me-up this particular morning. It was a Wednesday, and so far this week had done little to keep him occupied. It was partly his own fault, he knew. The crew he had assembled was top-notch, leaving little, sometimes nothing, for him to do himself. One of the young upstarts had even started going through the small, out-of-town obscure newspapers looking for interesting or curious cases he may want to learn more about. Sean had not had the heart to tell the young buck the fun for him was the search. So he covered the major papers and reviewed the others as they appeared on his email. With Jill humming in the background, a plate of warm pancakes, no meat to speak of, unfortunately, and several articles he had caught his attention spread across the table, Sean was in no hurry to go anywhere. He would relish this breakfast and make it last just as long as possible. There was just never a time to slow down like this, he thought, as he made sure Jill was preoccupied as he added more syrup to the stack. As he finished one article, he immediately went searching for another he remembered from his stack, one that had caught his eye. A man was missing. Seemingly just walked away after nearly beating his wife to death. He used his credit card to buy beer at a local market, and then disappeared. His car had been found at a makeout spot, with no apparent signs of a struggle. No cell phone use, no more credit card activity, no trace, just vanished. The article went on to explain how this guy was wanted in connection with his wife's beating when she nearly died when she fell down a flight of stairs at their home. Sean added 2 notes in the space to the right of the article. How long does it take to track someone down in a small town like that? Foul play? Next, he tackled a story involving a woman that was committing bank robberies around D.C. area. She had already hit 7 banks in the past 4 months, never leaving a clue other than the surveillance tapes. She had not even left her handwritten note explaining it was a holdup. As he studied the black and white, distorted portrait of the woman, Sean could feel the set of eyes over his left shoulder. Is this the other woman? Jill asked nonchalantly. Only if she can make a stack of pancakes like this, Sean came back as he held more than a mouthful on his fork. Guess I'm safe for another day then, huh? As she walked away. Sean loved her for all the right reasons. This day could not have started any better, he thought, and then he decided, I'm going to go for it. As he stood up and turned, Jill was standing close. He pulled her in closer and kissed her neck. She smelled wonderful, and with his arms locked around her waist, he rocked her from side to side gently, and then whispered in her ear. 20. Beams of light made their way across the foot of her bed. Madison could clearly see the remote lying there, willing for her to turn on the news. So far this morning, she had resisted, not sure she was ready for what was all over the local channels. It was not every day, not every year for that matter, that someone was shot in town, and the news hounds would cover it from sunup to sundown, interviewing anyone they could find on the streets, and make crazy assumptions to try and keep people watching. She was just not ready. The people that would be disappointed, she did not want to think about. She would rather die than get caught. After watching the ray of light crawl up her blankets, Madison decided she had to face the day. The television sprang to life, revealing a year or so old picture of Aaron. He was dressed in a suit that was 2 sizes too small, and a tie that featured a large fish of some sort. Tammy must have been so proud. He looked happy, though. The volume was too low, and she had to fight to get the sound where she could hear it. When she did, she wanted to turn it off and hide her throbbing hand under the pillow she now clung to. The perky redhead smiled through white teeth as she described the life, accomplishments, and contributions of the murdered man and what he had done for the community. When she promised to interview the bereaved wife after the break, Madison was glued, unable to even consider running to the bathroom, where she felt throw up rise in her mouth. Instead, she waited to see Tammy in action. It was the only way she would be able to communicate with her until this was over, and that was not scheduled for weeks. Tammy appeared on the screen, dressed in black, hair disheveled, no makeup, and looking like sleep had abandoned her. With faith in hand, Madison listened as the reporter asked Tammy ridiculous question after question. Madison could hear the fear of making a mistake in her friend's voice. Most, however, would consider it sadness and disbelief over the events of the past 24 hours. Are the others watching? And if so, have any of them changed their minds? She wondered. Moment by moment, she went through the night, retelling the chain of events in great detail, sobbing and whimpering at just the appropriate times. And when she described the perpetrator, Madison stiffened. The bushy red hair, pale complexion, height and weight, and green truck all rang true when told by the grieving widow. Only a select few knew the woman was doing cartwheels inside over the death of her husband. The local authorities had already put a sketch artist to work and created a composite of what the murderer may look like. He was a cross between Bozo the Clown and anyone's Uncle Eddie, Madison decided. Grabbing her robe and jumping out of bed, she was eager for a strong cup of coffee all of a sudden. Chapter 21. Sharon was next to last in the rotation. It had been her decision. She knew Megan wanted to be last to kill her husband, even though she wasn't sure why. It was so important to her. In her small but well appointed kitchen, she worked over homemade meatloaf, mashed potatoes. They were Kevin's favorites. She was looking to ensure a peaceful night, deciding on the way home she deserved a night of rest after the day she had had at the bank. A teller calling out, and every other customer seemingly in a cranky mood, and the other half wanting to discuss the murder, had made for a long, exhausting, and not so pleasant day. She deserved a night of peace. If there were two things that could make her husband relax and put him in a good spirit, it was his beer and her meatloaf. Tonight he could have as much of either as he pleased. Most women, she realized, would have dolled up, dimmed the lights, and set the mood with music. Not Sharon. There was no need. If tonight went according to script, Kevin would eat until he had to undo the snap and zipper of his jeans, and he would drink enough to forget about his doting wife, his crummy job, and the life he despised most of the time. Kevin, as far as Sharon was aware, had gotten to a point where he was only happy when his belly was full and his state was altered. It had not always been that way. In the beginning, and even a few years in, life was good for Kevin and Sharon. They had friends, hobbies, took vacations, cooked, and laughed together. There was no specific date she could point to that caused the change. It was more of a gradual transformation from what Kevin was to what he had become. And what he had become was a man capable of treating her worse than the trash he wheeled down to the mailbox each week. Reflecting on how he used to be so friendly to everyone, including her parents and siblings, she had failed to notice the headlights or the sound of the garage door. Those days had been everything she wanted or could have hoped for in their marriage, she thought. Now Sharon turned as Kevin stood in the doorway, appearing like he had been kicked by a mule and then dragged halfway around the countryside face down. He looked rough. Pushing past his appearance, Sharon reached into the freezer and retrieved the ice-cold beer she had chilled for him. There was no smile or even acknowledgement that she was in the room, only the sound of him chugging the beer as if he was afraid someone was going to steal it. Not sure how to start a topic of conversation or ask about his day, she returned to the final touches needed to ensure a wonderful dining experience. While taking the fresh bread out of the oven, she could sense him moving in behind her, still not saying a word. Part of her stiffened with the thought of him moving in behind her the way he did sometimes after a bad day. Instead, he passed her and made his way to the refrigerator. Not needing to look, she knew he had looked in the freezer to see if there was another companion to the first. There was not. She would remember that for next time. Then he went to the other side in search of another beer. Her heart sank as she heard the empty beer case hit the kitchen floor behind her. If he did not have another cold beer to chase the first, her dinner preparations were for naught. Is this how I'm to be treated after a rough day, and even a rougher week? He picked up the empty cardboard and threw it at her backside. One beer to last me for how long do you figure? Kevin's voice rose with each word. I have so few joys in life. Could I not have a cold beer when I get home? Huh? Can I? Sharon had been down this road enough to know there was no right answer, no magic excuse that could calm his rage, no chance for a peaceful evening, and she knew better than to state the fact that she had just brought that case yesterday. How could she have not noticed the case was empty? I'm sorry, Kevin. When I pulled out the one I stuck in the freezer, I didn't know it was the last. If we could just sit down and have a nice dinner, I'll run to the store after. Why don't you just go now, and I'll freshen up till you get back, and then we'll eat. Can we do that? Sharon was not sure what to make of the new development. Kevin was not known for his rational thinking or his change of heart. Grabbing her keys, she gave him one more smile and headed towards the door. It was the best she could ask for under the circumstances. Chapter 22. Kevin had been busy while his wife was off doing his bidding. He had not freshened up, as he had told Sharon he would. No, he decided to show his wife how much he disapproved of her constant and obvious neglect. Not for one moment during his task did he feel anything other than anger towards her. Not at one moment did he consider just letting it go. When he heard her car pulling back into the drive, he looked around and laughed out loud. He was pleased with his masterpiece. Now he would retire to the Old Faithful, his favorite chair, while he waited on his beer and her reaction. When Sharon entered carrying the case of beer under one arm and trying to balance the bananas she had found on sale in the other, it took her a second to realize something was wrong. Placing the case on the countertop and carrying the bananas to where the fruit bowl should have been and dropping them, she quickly made up her mind how to handle this. Her options were many, she understood, but one would give her the most long-term satisfaction. And with that, she retrieved a frozen mug from the freezer, poured Kevin a beer, not too much head, and headed towards the den. Showing no emotion, she set the beer on his coaster and walked away, saying, "Dinner will be just a little late tonight. I'll bring it to you when it's done." It may have been the hardest thing she had done in a while, to walk out of that room without smashing him over the head with the heavy mug. Returning to the scene, scanning from corner to corner, it was difficult to look at. It appeared everything from the refrigerator, as well as their dinner, had been thrown from ceiling to floor and everywhere in between. It would take hours to clean the mess he had made in mere minutes. Throwing the pasta in one bowl and slicing carrots in another, Sharon could feel the tears welling in the corners of her eyes. How could he have done this to her? What had she done in her life to deserve this man? When his plate was ready, she placed it on the tray along with another frozen beer and served her man his dinner. The thought had crossed her mind to add something to his food, something like, I don't know, rat poisoning. She had even looked under the sink to see what might be readily available. The only thing she found that might work was drain cleaner, and Sharon was not sure if it smelled or tasted, and it would give it away, in which case her life would have been over instead of his. Without a word between them the rest of the evening, night or morning, for that matter, Sharon heard him pull out of the drive and head off to his job at the local factory. His name badge read Chief Maintenance Engineer. Only one problem. He was the only person in the department. So he was the chief of himself, she had heard him say. Sharon knew it bothered him, that he had not done better for himself. He very rarely talked about work, and never brought it up in front of family or friends. It was one of the many burdens Kevin carried. When he had been gone for a good hour, Sharon sat down and wrote a short but precise note that she would deliver after running a few quick errands. It read, "I would like to suggest we change things up a little bit. I would like for my number 4 to become number 2 if possible. Location number 3 at the designated time would be great. If you cannot make it happen, I will continue as planned. Love, 4." I think that'll be a good place for us to stop today. I hope you enjoyed Season 2, Episode 4 of My Words, Our Journey, and I hope you'll join me next week for Episode 5. Thank you and have a great week.